darlings, Mimi G here at mimigstyle.com, and I am thrilled to be able to offer these step-by-step video tutorials to accompany my Mimi G for Simplicity patterns. Today we're going to be working on pattern 1276. Now the beauty of pattern 1276 is that both the tops and the bottoms are interchangeable. View A and B have the same bodice, but you can change the skirt to either a flared skirt or a tapered skirt. And view C has a completely different top, but can also be used with both skirts. In order to give you the confidence to easily interchange either bodice with the bottom, what we're going to do is we're going to fully construct view A and B of our bodice, which is essentially the same top with a sleeve variation, and we're going to fully construct and line the top for view C. Then what we'll do is at the end of this video, we'll move on to part 2, where I will show you how to fully construct and line both skirt options and attach them to our bodice. Let's go over some of the basic tools you're going to need. You are, of course, going to need pattern 1276. You are also going to need some pattern weights. I just use very large washers from my local home improvement store. You're going to need 2 scissors, one for paper, one for fabric, a disappearing fabric marker, a coordinating 22-inch invisible zipper, coordinating thread, a seam ripper is handy, and of course some pins. You will also need a small piece of fusible knit interfacing. I'm going to be using a poly rayon blend, which works really nicely, does not add a lot of weight to my fabric, and is easily fusible. Now we're going to begin view C. You're going to need to cut out the following pattern pieces. Pattern piece number 13, 14, number 3, number 15, number 7 and 8, and number 16, for either a 3/4 length sleeve or the elbow length sleeve, which you will cut along cutting line view C. For view C, I'm going to make the entire thing out of this amazing lightweight double knit ivory fabric, so I won't be color blocking this one. You can choose to color block it the same way that we did for A and B. You're going to lay it with right sides facing, lengthwise with selvage edges meeting. You're going to lay your pattern pieces on top of your fabric, making sure that your grain lines are running parallel to your selvage edge, and that any pieces that need to be cut on the fold are placed on the folded edge of your fabric. Now remember to read so that you know whether you're cutting 1 or 2 out. And after you've cut them out of fabric, you're going to cut them out of lining, and you're going to cut out pattern piece number 15 out of interfacing, all the same way that we did view A and B. You should have the following cut pieces: the back out of lining and fabric, the upper front out of fabric and lining, as well as the interfaced neckline, the lower front out of fabric and lining, the band for the front and the band for the back, both out of fabric and lining, and your sleeves out of fabric only. Now that we have all of our pieces, we can start sewing. Okay, we're going to start with the upper front piece and our back pieces, and we're going to join them together at the shoulder. So match your notches at the shoulder. And you should have both the front piece interfaced and both your back necklines interfaced as well. And we're going to sew across the shoulder using a 5/8 of an inch seam allowance. Sew across your shoulder, again using 5/8 of an inch seam allowance. And now I want you to press your shoulder seams open. Grab your lining pieces for your upper front and your back, and you're going to attach your shoulders front to back matching notches and sewing across the top using 5/8 of an inch seam allowance, the same way we did for our fabric. Okay, now that you have your lining sewn upper front to backs and your bodice, the fabric sewn upper front to back, we're going to lay these on top of each other, right sides facing. So I want you to pin at the shoulder. Make sure to align your shoulder seams. And you're going to pin at the end. Ouch, and don't poke yourself like I did. And you're going to pin at the other end. Okay, and now we're going to sew 5/8 of an inch all the way around. Make sure your seam allowances are flat. Now we're going to trim our neck seam allowance down to 1/4 inch. And now we're going to understitch. So open this up. And starting at the back and making sure your seam allowances are facing the lining, we're going to understitch, sewing on the lining about 1/8 of an inch away from our seam. Once you are done understitching, you're going to press your lining to the inside, and you're going to press using your iron all the way around the neck of your top. Okay, once we're done understitching, we're going to fold this back over so that right sides are facing and we're working on the wrong side. And we're going to pin and we're going to sew between dots. So we're going to sew from dot to dot. First I want you to go ahead and pin at your notch. And then pin at your dot. And then do the same thing on the other side. And now we're going to sew from dot to dot. Okay, now you're going to place your needle at the dot and remove your pin. And we're going to back stitch. And then sew using a 1/2 inch seam allowance. 5/8 of an inch seam allowance. From that dot to this dot, making sure that your lining and your fabric are aligned along the edge. And back stitch at the dot. Like this. Now we're going to trim our seam allowance between our dots. So clip up into your seam allowance, and we're going to trim away, leaving only 1/4 of an inch. Remove your pins. And now we're going to turn this to the right side. So you're just going to pull everything through. And now, as you can see, we have sewn the bottom where our opening is going to be, and now we just need to give this a press. As you can see, I pressed my neckline so it's nice and crisp, and then I pressed the finished bottom of our upper top, and now we're going to set this aside and we're going to work on the lower part of our top. So what you're going to do is you're going to place your fabric and your lining right sides together along the top edge, and you're going to match your notches. There we go. So match your notches right sides together, and we're going to pin at our dot. And we're going to sew again from dot to dot. Using 5/8 of an inch seam allowance, put your needle in the dot, remove your pin, backstitch, and sew from this dot to the next dot. Backstitch, and now we're going to trim the same way we did the upper part. Trim to 1/4 inch. Once you trim your seam allowance, I want you to turn this to the right side. And I want you to press this so it's nice and crisp. So if you want to press it on the inside, you can press this 1/4 inch seam allowance open so that it gives you a nice crisp seam, and then turn it to the right side and then press it again. Okay, now we're going to attach our upper front to our lower front. So I want you to open up your lower front here so that the fabric is on one side and the lining is on the other. And we're going to lay our upper front piece right side to right side, so the fabric side to the fabric side. And we're working only on our fabric side. So what I want you to do first is I want you to match your notch on your fabric, and I want you to pin, and then I want you to place a pin where our dot is. And so what we're going to do is we're going to sew from the armhole edge until we meet our stitching where our dot is. Backstitch at the beginning. And you're going to stop at the dot and backstitch. So go slow. You don't want to go past the dot, you just want to go to the dot and then backstitch. And you can do that slowly. And what has happened is we have now attached one side of our yoke. And now we just need to do the same thing for the lining. So open it up, and on your lining you're going to pin at your notch, and you're going to do the same thing. You're going to sew from the armhole edge until you meet your stitching or your little dot. As you approach, just go very slow because you don't want to go past your dot. And then backstitch. And now when we turn it around with seams pressed open, and you look at the inside, the right side, you can see that we have attached our upper front to our lower front. And we're going to do the same thing on the other side. So you can go ahead and open it up, just like we did before, and pin. If I could get a pin. Okay. And we're going to sew from there until you reach the existing stitching line, and then you're going to do the same thing that we did on the other side with the fabric. Pin at your notch and sew from the armhole to the existing, and then we're going to press those seams open. Now once you have joined your upper front to your lower front, go ahead and open this up. And I want you to go to your ironing table and I want you to press these seams open so that they are nice and flat on both sides. Now that you have your seams pressed, we're going to sew our side seams. So what we're going to do is I want you to grab front and back of your fabric pieces, and we're going to pin. So align your notches and pin. And then pin at the bottom and at the top. And we're going to sew from the bottom up, and you're going to do the same thing on the other side. So you're going to pin fabric to fabric, aligning notches, pinning at the bottom and at the top, and you're going to sew both side seams using 5/8 of an inch seam allowance. going to sew the other side the same way. Once we have both of our fabric side seams, we're going to sew our lining side seams the same way. So join your lining to lining, front to back, right sides together, pin at your notch at the bottom and at the top, and sew both side seams the same way we did for our fabric. Okay, once you've sewn both side seams, you can see that you have a clean inside and outside. And now I just want you to press your seams open. So just open this back up, take it to your ironing table, and press your side seams open on both your lining and your fabric. Now that we have fully constructed the front of our bodice for view C, the following steps for attaching our sleeve and our waistbands are the same as shown in view A and B, which are the next clips you will see. Okay, now that we basted together our armhole, we're going to sew our sleeve. So set this aside for just a sec and grab one of your sleeves, fold it over with right sides facing, and we're going to pin at the top. I'm going to pin at the bottom and in the middle. Pin at your notch, and we're going to sew 5/8 of an inch seam allowance all the way down. And then I want you to press this seam open and then do the same thing to the other sleeve. Okay, I pressed my seam open and then I pressed it to one side and I serged the edge of my seam allowance because we're not lining the sleeve, and so I just wanted a nice clean finish. You can leave it undone if you'd like. So I'm going to have you turn one sleeve right side out, and we're going to turn our top right side out. Wrong side. Here we go. And so once you have your bodice right side out and your sleeve right side out, I want you to align your underarm seam lines and pin. Once that's pinned, go ahead and work on the other side, on the inside. And you're going to pin, matching your double notches. That's the back of your sleeve. And then you're going to pin your single notch. And you should have a dot at the center sleeve cap, and you're going to pin that dot to your shoulder seam. And you should have another dot along your sleeve cap, which should line up to the dot on your bodice, and so you want to pin there. And the same thing on the other side, you should have a dot, and so you want to line those and pin there. And we're going to ease in our sleeve by pulling just a tad. Now on your sleeve, where we have, on your bodice where we have our lining, we're going to make a couple of snips. because we need a little bit of give. I'm just going to make like 3 snips into my seam allowance. And see how now when we pull that, they lay into each other. And so as we're sewing, we're going to be pulling just a tad to ease that in. And if it's more than you can get by pulling, you just simply make a little tiny snip. And that will help ease the sleeve in. And we're going to start at the bottom, underarm seam. And we're going to sew using 5/8 of an inch seam allowance. Make sure you don't have any ripples or folds underneath. Cut off any loose threads. And if you have a serger, go ahead and serge this seam allowance. If you don't have a serger, you can trim this down to 1/4 inch. And then you can turn your sleeve to the right side and you have a nice curved sleeve cap with no folds. You're going to attach the other sleeve the same way. Now we're going to work with our band front and back pieces. So I want you to lay your front band with right sides facing you, and I want you to place your back band with right sides facing the right side of the front, and matching your notches on the side and pin, and then pin at the bottom. And now you're going to do the same thing with the other side. Align your notch. Pin at the bottom. And now we're going to sew across the sides of our band. 5/8 of an inch seam allowance. You're going to sew the other one the same way. Once you've sewn the back to the front of your bands, I want you to go ahead and press the seam open like I did. And then grab your bodice, and we're going to attach our band to the lower bottom of our top. So with right sides facing, we're going to first match our notches in the center front, so go ahead and pin. And then I want you to pin at your side seams, so make sure that your seams are aligned. Match your notch and pin. And then do the same thing on the other side. Match your side seams. And match your notch. Now we're going to sew all across the bottom using 5/8 of an inch seam allowance. Make sure your seam allowances stay flat when you sew over them. Now we have attached our band onto our top. And now we're going to press this seam open. Now that you've attached your sleeve and your waistband to both your top and your lining, now you can continue on to step 2, where we will construct and attach our skirt.